A scientist in Lorneville who's fighting the Spruce Lake Industrial Park expansion is offering another reason to save the land from development. Chris Watson says the Save Lorneville group has discovered a tree in that development zone that's estimated to be about 400 years old. Watson is a member of that group and a research associate in the physics department at UNB. Watson shared his findings with other scientists in the province and sent the information to St. John City Council.
This whole process, started over a year ago, and Dillon Consulting did their environmental impact assessment, and they described this forest as low ecological value. They say the trees aren't large, they cite stunted growth, and myself and other community members, we walked through this forest, and we're quite familiar with the area, and we look at these trees and we say, hold on a minute, this is kind of a mischaracterization by Dillon in the EIA, citing this forest as low ecological value. So myself and a few other community members started doing a tree survey earlier this year, just basically measuring the diameter of the trees and showing that these trees are quite large and quite spectacular in this forest. And then more recently, we've been going around with an instrument called an increment borer, where we basically take core samples of individual trees and bring the core samples home, and we can count the rings in the core in detail to basically estimate the age of these trees. And so this week I came across this old spruce stand, and immediately walking into the stand, you could tell that these trees are particularly old. They were the branches are gnarled and twisted. There's a lot of lichen growing on the branches, the old man's beard. So you can tell they were quite old. So I cored a few of these trees, and a couple days ago counted the rings, and my jaw dropped. Like 300, and the oldest was 383 years old, which was to me was pretty astounding. I'm not an ecologist, I'm a physicist, so I'm not an expert by any means, but I suspect these trees are pretty ecologically significant.
Chris Watson is a physicist and a member of the Save Lorneville group, which opposes the expansion of the Spruce Lake Industrial Park. One of the people with whom Watson shared his data on that old stand of spruce trees is Ben Phillips. He's a lecturer in the Department of Geography and Environment at Mount Allison University and chief laborer at the Acadian Forest Dendrochronology Lab. He made headlines in 2005 with the discovery of the world's oldest living red spruce tree. It was found in Fundy National Park. He joins us now. Good morning, Ben.
Good morning.
So what did you think when you saw that data from Chris Watson on that tree?
I was extremely surprised because we have very, very few trees of that age in the province.
So it is significant. He is right about that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're driving down any road in the province and you step off into some crown land, it's uncommon to find a tree over 100 years old. If you find a tree that's maybe 150 to 200 years old, that's very rare. Often you only find those in protected areas. And to find any tree that's over 300 years old anywhere in the province, even in protected areas, is extremely rare. So to just find it in this location, and this location is relatively flat. It's why they want to build an industrial park there. But often you only find these types of really old trees where you have very steep environments. They're called inoperable areas where you can't get heavy machinery to cut the trees down. Often in easily accessible areas that are flat like this, you have the trees have been cut over and over again.
Yeah, and in fact, Chris has a list of dozens of trees they found that were over 100 years, many of them over 200, and like you said, this one close to 400 years old. So how do you go about determining the age of a tree? You saw the pictures that Chris had sent of how he had done it. What do you think of how he did it? And tell us a little more about how it is done.
Yeah, well, increment coring is it's not a type of destructive sampling, so the tree continues to live unharmed. So that's what you wanted. That's the type of sample you want to take. So they've simply he simply counted the rings in the core. What we do in the lab is actually glue them to a mounting board, surface them, highly polish them, put them under a microscope, and then with dendrochronology, we're actually measuring each tree ring to 1,000th of a millimeter, and looking at that tree ring pattern over time. And trees actually, they go through disturbances like spruce budworm outbreaks, or they live in the shade for periods of time. So sometimes they grow very slowly, and it can be very difficult to see these rings unless you're looking through a microscope and you can see like the cellular level. So I wouldn't be surprised if these trees are older than Chris expects.
And do you have any kind of plans to look at the samples that Chris gathered?
Chris is planning, I just heard from him last night, he's planning to bring the samples to me. So I told him I would mount them, surface them, and measure them, and actually cross-date the samples. That's where I kind of line up all the tree rings from each tree for each year and make sure that the pattern matches. And if it doesn't match, then I know that the tree may have not grown a ring.
So sometimes they don't grow.
Year.
They don't always grow a ring.
If there's a spruce budworm outbreak and it's been 5 to 7 years of defoliation by those caterpillars, the tree doesn't really have any photosynthetic energy to grow a new ring. It can survive. Spruce trees can survive for quite a while and not grow rings for multiple years.
And so that also means sometimes that maybe the biggest trees aren't the oldest trees, and that older trees might be smaller than you expect?
Always. The oldest, unless maybe you're talking about hardwood species, they're a little bit more consistent, but usually with any kind of conifer tree, the bigger ones are usually open grown. So they don't have any shade. They grow very quickly. They have large rings, and that's how they get to that size. And you can usually look at the tree and just look up and look at the crown. If it has a lot of branches, a lot of needles up there, then it's photosynthesizing a lot. That means it's probably growing quick. If you look at a tree that's tall, like Chris explained, with has dropped a lot of its lower branches, has maybe some gnarly branches up there and a small crown, and even when the bark is more exfoliated, it might have some different types of lichens on it. That's a good indication that the tree is probably older and it may not be that big of a tree.
And of course, you haven't seen the core samples firsthand. He used that tool to drill in there and pull out, it's like a kind of a long strip from within the core of the tree. So you haven't seen those firsthand yet, but you have seen some aerial photos from the Lorneville area. What did you think when you saw those?
Well, I didn't buy the aerial photos, but I went into the National Air Photo Library and looked up a few, and I just saw the thumbnails. Not high resolution, but you can just see in the thumbnails that the area has been continually forested, except for it looks like there's a small triangular patch that was a agricultural field maybe for some period of time. But going back to the 1930s, it's always been forested. So that's a good sign.
And so how important are those trees then to that ecosystem since they've been there so long?
Well, I mean, like I said, they're very rare. We have so little old growth left in this province. Any that we can protect is important. And I'll point to Nova Scotia because they've actually had a old growth policy in place since 2022. And in that policy for this type of forest, for red spruce coastal forest in Nova Scotia, if 20% of the trees are 125 years old, then they consider that an old growth forest and they don't cut it down.
Okay.
I'm not aware of any such policy in New Brunswick, but we should have one. We have a national commitment by 2030 that we protect 30% of our landmass in Canada. This agreement was signed in Montreal a few years back. 2030 is coming soon, and we have, as far as I know, less than 10% of New Brunswick is protected. So we have a long way to go to meet those targets. We need to be adding more protected areas, and this sounds like a great area to add there because it has some of the oldest trees in the province.
And I mean, what is the value in an old tree?
Well, to me, those old trees are full of data because they have a tree ring record that extends back hundreds of years. I found when I was a student learning to become a dendrochronologist, I actually found the world's oldest red spruce in Fundy National Park. And that tree is over 500 years old today. And it has data that extends back into the 1500s. So that's pretty exceptional. And that data is a record of the environment. And it's really difficult for me to find that. I have traveled all around Canadian Maritimes looking for old-growth forests to extend these tree ring records back further in time, so we understand what the history of the forest has been like, but so much of it has been lost. We've cut it down over and over again, so the old growth is practically gone, and that data has gone along with it. But also, there's all kinds of species that, every tree is a community, and those older trees with some of that older structure can be habitat for different species. So when you cut the forest down over and over and reduce its age and kind of turn it more into a monoculture, you're going to lose a lot of that habitat diversity. So these trees are very important for that.
And you mentioned, too, that you can look at the rings of that 500-year-old tree and get data from the 1500s. I mean, what kind of data are you talking about?
Well, I'll go back to my spruce budworm example. We know what to expect for spruce budworm cycles, partly based on our historic reporting of it, but that only goes back for about a century. We had two major spruce budworm outbreaks in the 1900s, but if we look back to the tree ring records, we could extend that back through the 1800s, through the 1700s, and beyond. So we have an idea ecologically what's been going on with spruce budworm over that long period of time. So that's one example. And different trees record the environment in different ways. So obviously the spruce tree is susceptible to spruce budworm, but a white pine or a eastern white cedar, they don't host budworm. They're sensitive to other things in their environment. So they all record different stories of their environments. And to me, it's important to have old growth of all of those so that we can understand the history of our province.
And so do you expect researchers hearing this news that there's a nearly 400-year-old tree out there in Lorneville might head out to take a closer look?
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be some interest. I would love to visit the site. I've been planning to get out there, but I haven't made it yet. But now Chris has given me a lot of reasons to speed up my process.
And what would you want to say then to the city who's considering clearing that site and putting an industrial park in there?
Yeah, well, I don't live in St. John. I'm not sure what the what the discussion is. I've read a couple of the CBC stories online of following along with it a little bit, but I'm not sure the need for space. But with these types of trees, I don't think you should be cutting down a forest and building a parking lot.
Okay. Well, Ben, thank you so much for your time and explaining the science for us.
Okay, you're welcome.
Ben Phillips is a lecturer in the Department of Geography and Environment at Mount Allison University and chief laborer at the Acadian Forest Dendrochronology Lab. And we also got a note from Wollastic Grand Chief Ron Tremblay. He says, quote, Cecilia Brooks, a Wollastiquee grandmother who's a specialist on plants and trees, will be walking the area to assess what medicines and at-risk plants and trees are in the area. The public hearing around the expansion of the Spruce Lake Industrial Park is expected to continue you at Monday's meeting of St. John Council. Our talkback number is 506-632-7747. And you can also write us an email at infoamstjohn@cbc.ca.